SMB Investor with Nick Bryant and Sean Smith.
Hey everyone, you got Sean Smith, Managing Partner of Search Fund Ventures. And today I'm joined by Burt Francis, who heads up the search practice and PE practice at ECA. We're going to talk a little bit about searching for leadership talent, how to vet talent, and how that applies to the self-funded search, independent sponsor world, especially for investors who are thinking about committing capital to a leader in this space. So with that, Burt, I'll let you jump in and give a career background and talk a little about the search practice at ECA.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks very much for having me on today. I'm excited to chat a little bit about what ECA does and where we play in the space in the practice that I lead. So quick overview on myself. I'm actually an engineer from earlier in my career. I worked at Boeing, where I made the jump over to consulting. I joined Oliver Wyman in their transportation practice. A lot of focus in the aerospace and transportation ecosystem. From Oliver Wyman, I made the jump over to executive search with ECA Partners about 6 years ago. And ever since then, I've focused on growing our private equity and private equity backed presence. I lead the practice now for commercial growth and value creation. I know that's a big, wide, ambiguous term, but there we support almost exclusively the investor backed ecosystem. And we have a little niche practice that I've really championed over the years, focused on the search fund backed investor space. A lot of experience there helping build out leadership teams around new searcher CEOs and, down through the ranks, second, third, fourth in command within that ecosystem. So ECA on the whole, specialized executive search firm, again, private equity backed focus, and I do lead that commercial growth practice.
And you guys call it a small niche within the value creation practice, but you've become pretty well known within the search fund space as the go-to group to source talent, whether it's for an independent sponsor that's found a deal and needs to put some folks at the helm, or potentially a search that's a few years into the hold period and might need some support, either filling leadership roles. So maybe just talk a little bit about how that's evolved since you started and what really have you seen, in the search world as you've built the practice.
Sure, and good question. The ETA community, the entrepreneurship through acquisition community, very tight knit community. Something that we saw very early in our exposure to the space, a tale of investors and co-investors and cap table, which got us exposed to the community very quickly. And early in our exposure there, I had no idea what ETA or the search fund space was at all. Fortuitously found ourselves doing some work for some of the investors in the space, got a peek behind the curtain. And I thought, wow, this is a really interesting community, tight knit, collaborative community, some gray area overlap out into the independent sponsor space. I decided about 4 or 5 years ago that this was going to be my primary focus. And I've spent that 5 years or so trying to get our name out there, expose ourselves to a lot of the different searchers in the space, investors in the space, going to a lot of the different conferences and events. Over the last 5 years, I'm sure you've seen it, the interest and attraction to the space and the asset class has only grown. Man, 4 years ago, if we were to be doing a C-level search in the ETA backed space, we would probably see 5 to 10% of the candidates that we're reaching out to out in the broader public that know what ETA is, that know what a search fund is. But now, this year, even last year, I'd say that number's grown up to probably 30 to 40, sometimes even 50% of the candidates we're talking to that know the space. So
Wow.
definitely grown. Attraction to this asset class has grown, and attraction to the idea of searching has grown quite a bit.
All right. Well, it's 4 times more awareness than, 4 to 5 years ago. So that's great to hear. Um, ECA touts a pretty unique approach to sourcing candidates and evaluating candidates. So maybe if you can summarize to some degree how your guys' approach works and why it's such a great fit for these unique breed of entrepreneurs in the search world? That'd be great.
Yeah, good question. Our approach, our founder wrote a book called Evidence-Based Recruiting. So we're very data driven. A bunch of the leadership team, we're all a bunch of ex-consultants. So we have a very systematic, data driven and structured framework, as you can imagine, for approaching the search. And what we've done is we've built the rest of our execution team, our operations focused team, around the profile of a analytical social science PhD. So we hire these PhDs to be the hub to our hub and spoke operation. They're taking our first crack at interviewing candidates with a tight closed loop feedback process to circle back around with feedback from our clients, circle back around with insights from our candidates to help us really hone in on the bullseye quickly. On the whole, on our process on the whole, we spend a lot of time up front trying to nail down what that bullseye might look like. So digging into, hey, if we sat down, board of directors, investors, if we all sat down 18 months from now or whatever that critical time horizon is, and we said, yes, we've achieved A, B, and C, this has been a success. We back down from that discussion to clear must-haves and nice-to-haves in the profile, and essentially down to career attributes and walks of life and career paradigms. So we spent a lot of time honing in on that bullseye and coupling that with additionally our appreciation for the nuance of the search or ETA backed business. We understand the relationship there with the board is often going to be more collaborative, mentorship, coaching oriented. So we're looking for candidates who can really appreciate that and, let's say, thrive in an environment like that, as opposed to maybe what you would out in the public see as your traditional private equity board. So that appreciation across my team has helped us to also hone in on candidates who are going to thrive in that type of an environment.
That's a great sort of line of thinking. So the sounds like one of the key components of narrowing in that bullseye is coachability in a sense, right? And then probably what comes with that is a degree of empathy, adaptability, resilience, all those good things. For an investor who's looking at an independent sponsor deal or a search deal, how can they create a similar framework, or what are some quick tips you would give that they can identify those traits that tend to lead to a good search candidate?
Yeah, good question. I would say we're talking about businesses who are often going to be in that lower end of the lower mid market. And one of the first things that we're looking for is what we call scrappiness, grittiness, scrappiness. And I would say I can't think of a search that we've done that didn't have that as a key attribute. So keeping an eye out for folks that can wear multiple hats. They're not afraid of getting their hands dirty, even if we're talking about at the C level here, getting their hands dirty, wearing multiple hats. We use the kind of cliche paradigm of coming from the board discussion out onto the shop floor to empty the garbages. That type of a mentality, it never, ever, ever comes across in the wrong way in this ecosystem. So we're always looking for that grittiness. For example, if we're doing a CFO search, hey, when's the last time you did your own journal entry? Those types of questions, that type of probing, that's going to be front and center for pretty much every search that we do in this size and scale. The other thing you touched on it, coachability, I think that goes hand in hand with no task being beneath these candidates. Hey, are you going to be able to take a slice of humble pie here and be coachable? And we're not looking for ivory tower leaders. We're looking for humble, coachable, collaborative individuals. So those are some quite sector, business, role agnostic attributes of leaders that we're almost always looking for. Beyond that, it really kind of comes down to what type of tenure, track record, and kind of tactical toolkit you're looking for. But I'd say those are probably a pretty good chunk of the agnostic attributes we look for.
Got it. So if you're kind of putting on your PhD in social science hat and kind of trying to give that knowledge to an investor looking at one of these deals, what are three questions you're asking about to kind of identify someone's coachability, for example?
Yeah, coachability. We ask a lot of questions about, hey, if we were to chat with up and down. So, hey, if we were to chat with your direct superior on X, Y, and Z role that you had, how do you think they would describe your leadership toolkit? Give them a just whether it's leadership toolkit or execution toolkit, whatever it might be. Try to get the candidates talking from a introspective way. And putting themselves in somebody else's shoes to talk about them, and you can get a pretty good glimpse behind the curtain as to how they see themselves as a leader. And again, the same in the opposite direction. Get them talking about, hey, how do you think some of your direct reports would describe your leadership toolkit? Understanding how they can take a step back and talk about themselves as a player and as a coach can say a lot about how they see themselves, and get them talking about some bumps in the road. Talk about something that didn't go right and how you reacted to it, how you learned from that. You can get a pretty good idea of personality traits from that tactic.
Yeah, that's excellent. To put on the hat of the classic question is what would your best friend say is your greatest strength, right? That's a more generic way to frame it, or your greatest weakness. But love that from the direct report up to your supervisor, that sort of thing. What would you say if investors start asking those questions and start incorporating that into their process when they're evaluating these opportunities and these leaders? What would be some red flags you'd say to look out for?
Well, if you start to get a lot of the generic, my worst quality is I work too hard. You get a lot of fluff. You're not getting a lot of substance. You're getting a lot of, what you would expect to see on the top couple of hits from hey, how do I pass an interview type of responses. You got to, if you can identify that, that might not be a red flag. That's a yellow flag. But if you continue to push and you're not getting any substance, there's typically a reason that they're not able to give you a good answer. So I would say people that are open to being vulnerable and presenting a vulnerability in their interviewing typically have a pretty high EQ and have a reason to feel confident that they can make themselves vulnerable in an interview. If somebody opens the kimono pretty handily and gives you some deep introspective responses, you're probably talking to a sophisticated leader who's got a track record. And that's even before we talk about true tactical track record.
So for folks that are listening, if it's conversation 2 or 3, continuing to with the searcher, continuing to probe when you get feedback that's a very generic response, continuing to ask the same question in different ways. I was speaking with a gentleman the other day that said an investor's only skill set is asking the same question in 5 different ways. So essentially, you want to keep probing until you get either more substance or, Bert, as you framed it, you're hitting a brick wall and not getting too deep. That's great feedback.
That's right. That's right. You got to pick through the fluff and get down into substance.
Excellent. So with those tips in mind, would love to hear a few stories from you on either examples where you placed a candidate, it was a great fit, into a search deal or an independent sponsor deal, and things went as you planned, or maybe on the flip side, you came in, had to solve a pretty sticky situation, and how those outcomes panned out.
Yeah, sure. So, a lot of interesting sticky situations because I don't have to tell you, the companies that these types of investors are buying often have some appropriate level of hair on them, whether they're just a lifestyle business that a founder, family owner has grown to the way that I describe it, the length of their arm, and probably is missing a lot of classically trained processes and tools and infrastructure. So what we're often seeing, and I can think of quite a few examples where we've been able to bring in a strong number two, whether that's an operational CFO or maybe even a finance savvy COO. That type of a CFO/COO operations finance leader is often that strong number two we bring in. A lot of times it's bringing in, we see this time and time again, bringing in some just classical financial reporting, bringing in some tools, processes for standardizing operations, and sometimes it's even just bringing in a strong thought partner to CEO that has felt like they're off on an island without somebody in the trenches with them. So solving a lot of those tactical problems can also bring in a good ally to the CEO. And I think, of a couple examples where it's tough. Sometimes a tough pill to swallow to think about what the CEO might have to pay that number two in command. But we've seen it time and time again where bringing in that strong number two pays for itself within the first year, just in terms of lifting off some of the burden off the CEO's shoulders and tightening up some processes, eking out some additional margin to the bottom line just through operational throughput and execution there. Some of the stickier situations that we've supported come around a lot of times when searcher CEO has dove into a business that may have been a little bit hairier than they thought, a little bit more complexity to the business, more complexity to the sector. And in those types of situations, let's say there's some speed wobble to the throughput of the business. And a lot of times what we help bring in from that perspective is a strong number two that has some balance to the executive team tenure. So we bring in somebody that's got some battle scars, if you will, some folks that have industry vets or have at least just seen a few rodeos in that space and have the battle scars and notches on the belt, whatever cliche term you want to use, some experience dealing with some of the complexities of that business, complexities of that sector, and help bring in some steady hand to maybe a less experienced entrepreneur, less experienced leader, and somebody that just frankly has less experience in that sector. Those are the times where you're not necessarily going to be looking for the up and comer number two. You're going to be looking for somebody to bring sector savvy to the boardroom, to the leadership team.
It's really interesting to hear you talk a lot about sort of bringing in a great number two, or as we talk about it in our diligence process, increasing the depth in the org chart, right? And you've also talked about number threes, number fours, just building that layer of a team so that you don't have what another gentleman I spoke with not too long ago calls these single points of failure, right? And I really like that. It's so critical to have that bench strength, even just insofar as letting someone take a vacation or call in sick. You really just can't do that if you're a searcher and you're the sole leader of the business and you've only got, 10 employees that rely on you to call the shots every day. So there's so much more than just bringing strategic value in many of these cases, right? It's also bringing in someone who you can trust to take over the reins if they need to.
Right. Doesn't necessarily need to be in a pinch type of situations. It can be the CEO needs to be able to take a step back from depth in the weeds to think strategically about how to grow the business, consider different business units or lines of revenue and what the business case is to keep them, wind them down, double down on growing them. And a lot of times it's that just, hey, I need that operational right hand to quote unquote run the business day to day, so I as the CEO can think about those more strategic things and not be dealing with payroll and operational throughput every day.
So if you had to, and at a really high level, it's probably hard to give a perfect estimate, but if you had to break it down between how often you're working on projects where you're filling in a gap after a deal's been closed, or maybe there's a key person departure that you got to fill in, versus you're sourcing a brand new CEO for a deal that's closing shortly. What's breakdown there?
I would say that breakdown for us in the space would probably be 65% of the time we're bringing in that strong number 2, 3, 4 in command to fill a gap. That gap may be the result of a departure post acquisition, or purely a situation where it never existed. Maybe the founder started this business X decades ago and never needed that right hand, or wasn't able to grow the business beyond X million because they never had the right hand. So I would say a slight majority is in that situation. I would say the remaining 35% are CEO situations where the new deal, hey, we don't have a leader for this role, or founder is going off into the sunset. We need to bring in a successor, and the successor, there was no succession plan, or we need a classically trained leader to take the reins. Um, I would say that's probably 60-40 in that kind of breakdown.
Got it. Yeah, that was going to be my estimate. It seems like in a lot of cases, searchers especially don't know what they don't know until a deal's closed, right? So identifying those gaps is just so hard to do during diligence. But once you're in the weeds and you can see dollar flow through the business, you can see how order management works, you can see how scheduling, whatever key operational processes you have, and you're really living those processes, you start to see, okay, it would be great to have a quality COO, you know,
Yep, I've
helping
got a
get through
great
this.
example. I totally agree. And good example recently, we helped a company bring in a COO. Searcher bought the business from a founder who had brought in a head of operations prior to transaction. And that head of operations was touted as, oh, this is going to be your right hand. This person can run the business, lead all the, essentially manage the team of, I think it was maybe a couple of dozen employees. And Searcher kind of took that at face value, got a lot of good feedback from founder and the team and this individual. But the Searcher got in there as the CEO, and within a couple of short weeks understood that, wow, I can't rely on this individual as my COO. Not necessarily a fireable offense, but this is not going to be the person that's going to help me grow this business. And that's when we got called in to bring in somebody that's going to be classically trained, that can be relied on as that strong number two.
Yeah, it's a great example, and we've seen those types of dynamics play out in our portfolio as well. One question we always ask is, when we look at an org chart during our diligence process, there's almost always some narrative around, oh, the current operations manager is going to step up into a COO type role. The lead technician is going to step up into the GM role. There's always some type of narrative around that in most of the deals we look at. And we'll always ask, what happens if that relationship doesn't pan out? What's your kind of contingency plan? How are you building some org chart depth, right? Going back to some of what we talked about earlier. And it's 50-50 whether there's a good response to that. But part of why we like having you on call, Bert, is if they don't have a great strategy, we can hopefully call you guys to make sure there is a great strategy post close.
That's right. And one of the reasons we love the independent sponsor and ETA community so much is that we have positioned ourselves as a resource to be on call to say, hey, looking at this deal, Bert, and we've got some hesitations around X, Y, or Z leader that's supposedly coming along with the deal. We're trying to hedge our bets here. We're thinking we might have to do a CFO search in whatever it might be, Houston, in the X, Y, or Z space. How does that feel to you? What are your thoughts? Is that a healthy market? And just to, if nothing else, bring a little bit of a better gut feeling into diligence, and try to understand what the risk is and what the opportunity might be to, if we need to replace that individual. We're happy to be that type of a casual resource. If it turns into a search, great. If not, we're happy to be that thought partner in research regardless.
Yeah, and it's a great resource that you guys provide. It's such a great value proposition, especially because the acuteness of key person risk in virtually all of these small business acquisitions is so intense, frankly. And to be able to say, well, our we've got a mitigation plan, but if that mitigation plan doesn't work out, we've got a team at ECA to support, and it's just great to have those layers of mitigation in every type of risk we see.
Fair point, fair point. And that's makes a ton of sense. If I were in your shoes, and that's often what we're thinking, hey, put ourselves in the investor's shoes here. They're looking at this deal. They're looking at the people that are going to be running this small business. They need to feel comfortable on what they're getting into, because a business is nothing else more than, the the people that are pushing through the throughput of the operation. So fully agreed there.
Very good. Well, I think that's pretty much everything we had. Any final closing remarks you want to make?
I guess on the whole, we've really enjoyed getting deeper down the rabbit hole in both the ETA community and the independent sponsor ecosystem. We thrive in that lower end of the lower middle market, and again, coming back to kind of what we see as the hot button items for grittiness, scrappiness, and a lot of general athleticism right in our wheelhouse, and we really enjoy working in that size and scale. So happy to be a resource to you guys and the community any way we can.
Next time we need a good president or COO, we know who to call.
That's right.
Thanks, Bert.
All right. Thanks, Sean.